Dear friends and listeners, welcome. What I am about to share with you tonight is not an ordinary story. This is the kind of story that once you hear it will make you feel a cold current running through your chest. The kind of story that makes the hairs on the back of your neck stand straight up. The kind of story that makes you want to glance over your shoulder in the quiet of a dark room just to make sure you're still alone. The name of this story is The Court of the Jinn. The year was 1962, the late autumn, deep in the hill country of eastern Tennessee, not far from the Smoky Mountains. There was a small, forgotten town called Millhaven, population a few hundred souls. No stoplight, no diner, just old houses, older trees, and older secrets. In that town lived a man unlike any other. His name was Elias Whitmore. He was 55 years old, give or take. His hair had gone half white, but his eyes were still sharp, still focused, still cutting right through you, like he could see something behind your face that you didn't even know was there. Elias Whitmore was not a judge in any courtroom. He held no title. He wore no robes. But for 40 miles in every direction, people knew if you had a dispute that couldn't be settled, if the law couldn't help you, if the church had tried and failed, you went to Elias. He was what the old folks called a man of discernment, a peacemaker, a resolver. The stories about him were legendary. One time, and people still talk about this, there were two families over in Harlan County, bad blood going back 3 generations over a strip of land no wider than a country road. Everybody said it would end in gunfire. People were sharpening things, loading things. The sheriff had given up. Elias drove out there. He sat down on a wooden porch with both families. He listened for 3 hours, did not say a word, just listened. And then he gave his answer. Both families drove home that evening, shaking hands. Nobody could quite explain how he did it. Elias had grown up poor, but educated by a traveling preacher who saw something in the boy. He'd read every book in 3 counties. He'd studied under an old man in the Appalachian Hills, a man of deep spiritual understanding, a man who people said knew things that couldn't be learned in schools. After 4 years with that old man, Elias came back to Millhaven, and people noticed something different about him, something they couldn't name. He had a gift. He could sometimes heal people that doctors had given up on, not with medicine, with prayer, with something deeper. The local folks said, if there's a spirit in your house and Elias Whitmore walks through the door, that spirit will leave on its own. He doesn't even have to ask it. Now, all of this is background, because the real story begins in the fall of 1962. On a Saturday afternoon, Elias had driven out to the neighboring town of Cedar Bend to settle a dispute between 2 brothers over their late father's land. He sat under a big old oak tree in the yard, listening to both sides go back and forth. And then he stopped. Something made him look up. There, sitting on a branch of that oak tree, were 2 large black birds, not crows, bigger than crows, with a thin white mark on their throats, just sitting there, not moving, not making a sound, and staring directly at Elias.
Now, Elias had seen a lot of birds in his life. He knew birds, and birds don't stare at people like that, not with that kind of intention. He held their gaze for a moment. Then, quietly, in his mind, he thought, "You're not birds, but I won't ask what you are. When the time is right, you'll tell me." He finished the mediation. He stood up, he stretched his back, and when he looked at the tree again, the birds were gone. Nobody had seen them fly away. No one had heard them leave. They were simply no longer there. From that day forward, wherever Elias went to mediate a dispute, those two birds appeared, sometimes on a fence post, sometimes on the roof of a barn, sometimes on a power line down the road, always still, always watching him. Elias understood, in the way he understood things, that these birds were observing his work, studying it. But why? He would not have to wait long for the answer. It was a Tuesday night, about 2 weeks later. Elias was driving home after a late mediation session, about 12 miles outside of Millhaven. He decided to take the old back road, the one that runs along the edge of Heron Creek. No lights out there, just the moon and the trees and the sound of water over stones. He parked the car where the road turned to gravel because a washout had made the last quarter mile impassable. He was going to walk the rest of the way. He got out of the car, he started walking, and then he stopped. There was something standing in the road ahead of him, something tall. Tall is not the right word. It was enormous, like a figure carved from the darkness itself. 12 feet, maybe more, and yet it had the shape of a man, an old man, with a long white coat that seemed to glow, softly, steadily, like moonlight gathered in cloth. Beside it stood a horse, white as snow, and not quite like a horse you'd see in a field. Elias stood there. His heart thumped once, hard inside his chest, but he did not run. He was not the kind of man who ran. He took a breath, and he walked forward. And when he was about 20 feet away, he stopped, and he said in a clear, steady voice, "Peace be upon you." There was a silence, long enough that the creak seemed louder than before. And then, from that enormous figure came a voice, low, resonant, like a bell struck deep underground. "And upon you, peace." A pause. "You already know I am not a man," the voice said, "and you did not run. That tells me everything I needed to know about your courage." Elias said, "Are you what I think you are?" "Yes," the figure said. "I am of the Jinn. My name is Solomon. I am the elder of the Jinn in this region. I have thousands under my watch." Elias said, "What do you want from me?" Solomon said, "I have a problem, one I cannot solve myself. I have watched your work for weeks. I sent 2 of my sons to observe you. They took the shape of birds." Elias thought of the 2 black birds. He nodded slowly. "I have twin sons," Solomon continued. "They are both in love with the same girl. This has created a conflict between them so deep that they have begun to harm each other. Our elders cannot resolve it. I want to bring you to our realm. My sons have agreed. Whatever judgment you give, they will accept." Elias was quiet for a long moment.
Then he said, "I won't go tonight. I have people depending on me. I need to think it through." Solomon said, "I understand. I will return." And with that, the figure dissolved into the darkness. The horse was gone. The road was empty. The creek ran on. Elias stood alone in the dark for a long moment. Then he turned and walked back to his car, and in his mind only one question turned over and over. Is it right for a man to walk into the realm of the Jinn, to sit in judgment there?
Now, while Elias Whitmore was wrestling with Solomon's proposal, something else entered his life. something that would change everything. He had a distant cousin, a woman named Ruth Calloway, who lived down in the Mississippi Delta outside of Vicksburg. Ruth was a good woman, plain-spoken and deeply kind. She arrived one afternoon at Elias's door, without a phone call, without warning. Her face said everything before her words did. Dark circles under her eyes, the look of a person who hadn't slept right in weeks. Elias sat her down and poured her a glass of water. "Ruth," he said quietly, "tell me." She pressed her hands together and said, "It's not about me, Elias. It's about my neighbor's boy. His name is Samuel, 22 years old. He was studying at a religious seminary down in Hattiesburg. Sharp as a tack, that boy. Wrote poetry, sang hymns with a voice like a river. Never a bad word from anyone about him. But 3 months ago, he just stopped. He lies on the floor of his room, can't move, can't speak, can barely eat, just stares at the ceiling with these empty eyes. And every night, at the exact same time, he screams like something is tearing him apart. Then he eats like an animal, just shovels food in, and then he goes quiet again. The doctors say they've never seen anything like it. The pastors have come and prayed over him. Nothing works. Nobody can explain it." Elias listened carefully. Then he asked, "What happened right before this started?" Ruth said, "He'd gone with a small ministry group up into the Ozark Mountains of Arkansas, a 40-day trip, a place called Stonehaven Ridge. But he disappeared on day 30. They found him 12 days later at the edge of a forest. His clothes were torn, his skin had marks on it. He was unconscious, and when he woke up, he was like this." Elias asked, "What's his full name?" "Samuel Reed. His parents are James and Clara Reed. Good people, Elias, honest people, and their boy is dying in front of them." Elias agreed to make the trip to Vicksburg. When he arrived and walked into that room, he had to steady himself. The young man, Samuel, lay flat on the floor on a thin mattress. He had wasted away to almost nothing. His cheekbones pressed sharp against his skin. His eyes were open, wide open, but there was nothing behind them. No light, no awareness, like looking into two dry wells. Elias knelt beside him. He worked quietly. He used every method he knew. Nothing responded. If a spirit was present, it should have reacted by now, but there was nothing. No movement, no resistance, no presence that he could detect. Elias left the house troubled. That night, lying in a small guest room, he thought, if Solomon comes again, I need to ask him about Samuel Reed. 15 days passed. Elias was driving home from a late-night session in Cedar Bend when he saw, parked at the side of the road near Heron Creek, that same impossible glow. Solomon was waiting. Elias stopped the car, got out. They exchanged greetings. Solomon asked, "Have you decided?" Elias said, "I will go with you, but first I need to tell you something." He told Solomon everything about Samuel Reed, the symptoms, the timeline, the seminary trip, the Ozark Mountains, Stonehaven Ridge. Solomon listened without interrupting. When Elias finished, the old Jinn was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I know of Stonehaven Ridge. It is not a simple place. There are forces there that even my kind cannot approach easily. I will send some of my strongest to investigate, but understand, this may take time." Elias said, "I need to know what happened to that boy, and if it's possible, I want to help him." Solomon said, "Agreed, but you must also hold to your side. You will come with me to our realm." Elias said, "I'll come, but on one condition." Name it. When I say I'm ready to leave, you bring me back. No questions, no delays. Solomon said, we Jinn do not break promises. You have my word. They shook on it. If a man and a figure 12 feet tall, glowing like starlight, can be said to shake on anything. Solomon said, the next full moon, be at the creek at midnight. Be ready. 3 days later, Solomon returned, not for the journey, but with information. He had sent 3 of his most powerful Jinn to investigate Stonehaven Ridge. What they reported back made Elias's blood run cold. Listen carefully now. During Samuel's 40-day trip to the mountains, he had developed a habit of walking down each afternoon to a spring-fed pond near the trail. He'd sit there alone and sing old hymns, gospel songs, whatever came to him. He had a beautiful voice. The sound carried through the trees and up the ridge. On the other side of that ridge, someone was listening. A girl. Her name was Maya. She lived deep in the woods with her 3 older brothers, Cain, Abel, and Brutus. The brothers were feared throughout that whole stretch of Ozark country. They practiced dark arts, old ugly things that decent people don't speak about. The locals called them the Ridge Men and stayed far away. But Maya was different. She had grown up in that world and hated it, and when Samuel's singing reached her ears, something opened up inside her that had been closed a long time. She came down to the pond one afternoon. Samuel saw her. She was unlike anyone he had ever met. They talked again the next day, and the day after that. By the 3rd week, they were in love. Maya said, my brothers will never let me go. We have to run. They planned it for a Thursday morning before dawn. But they were caught. Cain woke early. He noticed Maya was gone. He woke his brothers. They used their dark gifts to track the 2 of them down before they'd made it half a mile. What followed was something that Elias, when he heard it, had to close his eyes against. Samuel was beaten. Maya was dragged back. She begged her brothers to let Samuel go. They did not listen. Maya could not bear what she was watching. She walked into the woods, found a plant she knew, a bitter, poisonous thing, and she drank its sap. Within an hour she was gone. The brothers found her, and even in them, even in those 3 hard, dark men, something broke. They had loved their sister, not gently, not freely, but they had loved her. And they blamed Samuel for her death. They did not kill him. Killing would have been mercy. Instead, they made him a prison. They performed their darkest ritual. They took a large timber rattlesnake and bound a mute spirit, a Jinn that cannot speak and cannot hear, inside it, using Samuel's clothing, his hair, and his blood. They drove 5 needles into the snake's body, 2 in the front, 2 in the back, 1 in the throat. They hung the snake upright against a tree deep in the woods. Every night, at a precise hour, they would briefly remove the needle from the throat. At that moment, and only that moment, Samuel could open his mouth. He would feel ravenous, desperate hunger. He would eat, frantically, and then the needle went back in, and he went silent again. That is why every pastor and doctor who came to see Samuel found nothing. A mute spirit responds to nothing. It cannot be addressed. It cannot be commanded to leave. It cannot be detected by conventional means. That is why everyone failed. Elias sat with this information for a long time. Then he said quietly, "Can he be saved?" Solomon said, "I am already moving on it, and there is something else you should know. The price for going to our realm is that you must come." Elias said, "I know. I said I would. I meant it."
The full moon came. Elias told his wife, Margaret, that he had a mediation that would take him away for a few days, maybe longer. She was accustomed to this. She packed him a small bag and kissed him on the cheek and said, "Don't let anybody talk you into anything foolish." He smiled. "I'll try not to." At midnight, he walked down to Heron Creek. The night was unusually still. No crickets, no wind. The moon laid a white road across the surface of the creek, steady and perfect. And then, from somewhere above, a sound. Elias looked up. 2 white horses descended from the sky. Not falling, descending, slowly,
deliberately, the way a feather falls. They were luminous, almost translucent, and around each one, a soft ring of light rotated like a slow halo. Solomon was astride one, the other was riderless. They landed, or arrived really, on the bank of the creek without making a sound. Solomon dismounted, all 12 feet of him, and said, with something that might have been warmth, "Mr. Whitmore, you came." I said I would. He held out a folded garment, white like his own, but sized for a man. "This is the honored guest's robe of our realm. Please put it on. And this," he produced a length of white cloth, "must cover your eyes for the journey. The path between our worlds is not meant to be seen by living eyes." Elias put on the robe. He tied the cloth over his eyes. He walked toward the riderless horse. The horse lowered itself to make it easier to mount. Elias climbed on. And then, movement. But not like riding. Not like anything he'd felt before. It was more like becoming movement. The horse was running, but there was no ground beneath them. There was wind, but not cold wind, a pressured stillness, like being inside a fast current underwater. His sense of time dissolved entirely. He didn't know if it had been 10 minutes or 10 hours. And then the horse stopped. "We are here," Solomon said. "You may remove the cloth." Elias unwrapped the cloth from his eyes and stood speechless. He was standing in a courtyard, vast, open, lit by a light that had no visible source. The structure ahead of him was not a building exactly. It was more like a building's idea, rendered in materials that had no earthly names. Stone that reflected like a mirror, archways that seemed to breathe. Standing in the courtyard to greet him were perhaps 20 beings, all of them enormous, 12 feet or more. They regarded him with expressions he couldn't quite read. Not hostile, not warm, something in between. Respect, maybe, cautious respect. But then, his eye caught someone in the group who did not belong. A small, dark-skinned man, 5'6", maybe, white-haired, about 70 years old, wearing a simple work shirt and suspenders, looking like he'd just walked off a farm in rural Georgia. A human being, right here, in this place. Elias filed that away. Solomon made introductions. The old human man's name was Henry Malone. He was from Savannah. He'd been here for some years. Elias was led to a private room. It was simple, but immaculate, and there was food laid out. The food was strange. The colors were too bright, the aromas too precise, like every dish was somehow more itself than food could reasonably be. But there was one item, a small square of something sweet. It tasted exactly like the caramel cake his mother used to make. He stopped chewing. A human made this, he thought. He rested. Later, Solomon came and said, "The hearing will be tomorrow morning. Tonight, if you wish, Henry will show you around." Henry Malone came to the door and extended a weathered hand. "Don't worry," Henry said. "I know it's a lot to take in. First week, I walked around with my mouth open the whole time." They walked together through the realm. The gardens were unlike anything Elias could have described to anyone who hadn't been there. The flowers were colors that English doesn't have words for. Not purple, not blue, not silver, but somehow all three at once and something else besides. The scent was overwhelming without being overpowering, like God's idea of what a flower should smell like before the fall. "Don't pick anything," Henry said quietly. "It'll die if a human hedges it. That's just the way it is here." They came to a river. Elias stopped walking. The river ran in two channels, side by side, within the same banks, and never mixed. One side was white, the color of milk or fresh snow. The other side was deep red, like old wine or blood. The two streams ran parallel, inches apart, for as far as the eye could see, and where they touched, they simply did not blend. Elias crouched down and stared. "How?" he started. "About 400 years ago," Henry said. "Two brothers. A tragedy. Solomon will tell you if you ask. This river showed up the day after it happened and has never changed." Elias stood up slowly. "Henry," he said, "how did you end up here?" Henry was quiet for a moment. They kept walking. Finally he said, I'm from Savannah, Georgia. I used to make pralines. Family recipe, going back generations. People came from 3 counties away from my pralines. He chuckled softly at the memory. One night I was coming home from the market. Bad day, didn't sell much. And I came across a cat on the side of the road. A mother cat, 6 tiny kittens, all of them skin and bones, crying in the dark. I didn't have money to spare, but I had pralines that hadn't sold. I set the whole box down for them and walked home. Elias smiled, and the cat was Jinn. All of them. Henry shook his head slowly. I didn't know, but they remembered. Apparently gratitude means something serious in their world. But how did you get here? About a year later, an old man came to my shop, said he needed someone to work for him for 5 years, said he'd pay well. I had 2 daughters whose weddings I couldn't afford. I needed the money bad, so I said yes. He paused. That night he took me to the river. A boat came up from underwater. I blacked out, woke up here. Elias looked at him steadily. Do you want to go back? Henry thought about it. I think about my daughters every day, but my time's almost done. Solomon's promised to send me home when the 5 years are up. He paused. My worry is whether they're all right, whether the girls had enough to get by. Elias said nothing, but in his mind, something was forming.
The next morning, the hearing was convened. The room was vast, a high-ceilinged chamber with walls of that same impossible mirror stone, catching light from everywhere and nowhere. In the center of the room, a simple raised seat for Elias. Beside it, a larger one for Solomon. The 2 sons were brought in. They were identical in every visible way, brothers from the same birth, the same face, the same height, the same bearing. But the energy between them was charged and cold, like 2 magnets pushed face to face. Their names were Nathan and Nathaniel. Each of them looked at Elias with something complicated in their eyes, not hostility, but the guarded wariness of someone who has decided to trust a process they're not sure about yet. Behind a curtain partition at the far end of the room, the girl. Her name, Solomon had told him, was Jewel. She would not appear directly, but she would answer if spoken to. Solomon addressed the chamber. Both of my sons love this woman. She has not rejected either of them, but Jewel can only be given in marriage once. The question of who she chooses has turned my sons against each other. They have agreed. The judgment of this man, Elias Whitmore, will be final. We are here to receive that judgment. Elias looked at Nathan, then at Nathaniel. You've both agreed to accept my ruling, whatever I decide? Both nodded. He looked toward the curtain. And you, Jewel? A pause, then a voice, clear, unhurried, neither afraid nor performing bravery. Yes, I agree. Elias turned to Solomon. One question before I begin. After you, who leads this realm? Solomon said, whichever son proves himself worthy. Elias nodded slowly. Give me some time. He rose. He walked out to the garden alone. He sat on a stone bench near the 2-toned river and looked at the water for a long time. He thought. Here was the problem as most people would frame it. 2 men love the same woman. One man gets her, the other loses. How do you make that fair? But Elias had learned after decades of settlement work that problems framed that way almost always had the wrong frame. The real question was never who wins. The real question was always, what kind of wound are you trying to prevent? If he simply picked one brother, the other would carry that loss like a stone for the rest of his existence. The brothers would be sundered. This family, this realm, would have a fracture running through its foundation for generations. He thought longer, and then something came to him. He stood up. He walked back inside. I am ready to give my ruling, he said. The room went quiet. My ruling is this. He paused, letting the silence hold. Beginning tomorrow, neither Nathan nor Nathaniel will look at Jewel, and Jewel will not look at either of them. Any one of the 3 who breaks this rule, who looks when they were told not to, forfeits their claim permanently. The one who does not look will receive Jewel's hand. Murmuring in the chamber, Elias raised his hand slightly. But there is a second part.
The son who does not marry Jewel will be named the next leader of this realm. Solomon will today identify another young woman of good standing. That son will be offered her hand in marriage. The two weddings, Jewel's and the other woman's, will take place on the same day at the same hour. Silence. Solomon leaned forward slightly. Explain your reasoning. Elias said, the brother who values power over love will find it easy not to look. He'll tell himself, I have the realm, I'll be fine, I'll move on. And he will move on. Distance and time will do the rest. The wound will heal cleanly. He paused. The brother who truly loves Jewel above all things, who cannot imagine his life without her, he will find the rule almost impossible to keep. He will want to look, and the moment he does, he has revealed his heart. And the heart, in this case, is the forfeit. He looked at both sons. Love and power. One of you will choose love, one of you will choose power, but both of you will get what you actually want most. And neither of you will have to watch the other suffer with nothing. He looked at Solomon. The rivalry ends not because one brother beats the other, but because they are each given something real to hold on to. You cannot hate your brother when you both came out of the same room with something in your hands. A long silence stretched through the chamber. Solomon said, slowly, I have lived for centuries. I have heard many judgments. Another pause. This is the best one. Nathan and Nathaniel looked at each other. Something passed between them. Something complicated and long overdue. From behind the curtain, Jewel said simply, I accept this. The hearing was concluded. After the chamber cleared quests, Elias said. Solomon said, speak freely. First, when Henry's 5 years are done, you send him home, with his full payment, enough for his daughter's weddings and then some. You do right by him. Henry, standing quietly by the door, turned his waist away. His shoulders were shaking. Second, the boy I told you about, Samuel Reed, I need to know he's going to be all right. Solomon said, I have already acted. I sent 100 of my strongest to Stonehaven Ridge 3 nights ago. They found the snake. They removed the bound spirit from inside it. They destroyed the snake. The moment the mute spirit was freed from its prison, the ritual began to collapse. Samuel will begin to recover. Elias said, and the 3 brothers, Cain, Abel, Brutus, they cannot touch Samuel Reed again. Solomon said, I have made certain of this. What they did is a violation that requires answer, and it will receive one, in their time, in their way, but it will not fall on Samuel. Elias sat back. He let out a long breath. The kind of breath that a man releases when he has been carrying something heavy for a long time and has finally set it down. Then I'm ready to go home, he said.
Before Elias mounted the white horse, Solomon placed something in his palm. A ring. It was the color of gold, but heavier than gold and warm to the touch, not with heat, but with something else. Something that had no name in any language Elias knew. If you ever need to reach me, Solomon said, go to any natural body of water, a creek, a river, a pond, and drop this ring in. I will know. He paused. It will not stay lost. No matter where you drop it, the ring will find its way back to you. Elias turned it in his fingers. A ring that can't be lost, he said quietly. Consider it a small courtesy, Solomon said, for a man who came into our world and treated it with respect. Elias put on the white cloth over his eyes. He mounted. The horse moved. That same sensation, the current, the pressured stillness, the disillusion of time. And then, quiet. The horse stopped. Remove the cloth, Solomon's voice said, from somewhere just behind him. Elias unwrapped his eyes. He was standing on the bank of Heron Creek, the same spot he'd lifted from. The moon was low and western, nearly down, an hour before sunrise, maybe less. He climbed off the horse. He turned to say something. Solomon and the horses were already gone. He walked home, let himself in quietly, went to bed. In the morning, he came downstairs and asked Margaret what day it was. He had been gone 5 days. It had felt like 2. 3 weeks later,
a letter arrived from Ruth Calloway in Vicksburg. She wrote that she hardly knew how to say it, but Samuel Reed had woken up. Not gradually, woken up like a man surfacing from deep water. He'd sat up in bed, looked around the room, and asked his mother why she was crying. The doctors said they had no explanation. They called it spontaneous recovery. One of them used the word miraculous and then seemed embarrassed by it and crossed it out. Samuel Reed ate a full breakfast, then lunch, then dinner. He walked to the end of the block and back. Within 2 weeks, he was reading again. Within a month, his mother heard him singing in the kitchen. Ruth wrote, "Elias, I don't know what you did or how you did it, but I believe with my whole heart that it was you." Elias read the letter twice, folded it carefully, put it in his desk drawer. "Alhamdulillah," he whispered to himself. "All praise belongs to God." As for Henry Malone, at the end of his 5 years, a small flat-bottomed boat appeared on the Savannah River one evening at dusk. Henry Malone stepped off it onto the bank of his hometown, carrying a leather satchel that was heavier than anything a man his age should have been able to lift. He never told his daughters where he had been. He said simply that he had been doing work far from home, and that he was sorry for the worry. With the money in that satchel, he paid for 2 weddings, beautiful ones, and bought a small house in a quiet neighborhood, and lived there quietly and gratefully for the rest of his days. He made pralines until his hands couldn't hold a spoon anymore. And he never left food out on the road at night without pausing to wonder, just for a moment, what he might be feeding. Back in Millhaven, Nathan and Nathaniel kept their agreement. One of them kept his eyes down, as hard as it was, for 40 days. He never looked. He became the leader of the realm when Solomon's time came. He governed wisely and firmly, and the realm did not grieve him. The other brother, the one who could not stop himself, who looked on the 14th day, because the feeling in his chest was bigger than the rule, married Jewel. They say he never stopped being grateful for the looking. Both brothers attended each other's weddings. Both smiled genuinely, which is rarer than most people know. Elias Whitmore kept that ring. He used it maybe a dozen times over the following years, always at Heron Creek, always at night. He'd drop the ring in the water, and the next morning, Solomon would be standing somewhere nearby, patient and enormous as always, ready to talk. They discussed things, hard cases, spiritual puzzles, questions about justice and mercy and where the line between them ran. Elias never asked to go back to the realm, and Solomon never asked him to. One evening, Elias was in his late 70s by then. He called his son, Thomas, into the study. He set the ring on the desk between them. "I want you to have this," he said. Thomas picked it up and turned it over. "What is it?" "An old connection," Elias said. "If you ever need to use it, you'll know. If you don't need to, don't. And whatever you do, don't use it for anything dishonest. It will know." Thomas said, "Dad, where did this come from?" Elias smiled, the kind of smile that holds an entire story inside it, wrapped tight, the way an old man wraps the best parts of his life. "From a promise kept," he said. That night, Elias Whitmore went to sleep. He did not wake up. His face, his family said later, looked perfectly at rest, like a man who had finished everything he set out to do, and found that it was good. Dear friends and listeners, that was the story of the Court of the Jinn. And before I let you go back to your night, I want to leave you with what I believe this story is really about. It is not about the supernatural, not primarily. It is about a man who was given power, real power, the rarest kind, and used it entirely for others. When Solomon said, "Ask for anything you want," Elias Whitmore asked for a sick boy he'd never met, and an old man worried about his daughter's futures. Not for himself. Not once. That is the kind of justice that doesn't need a courtroom, that doesn't need a robe or a gavel or a title. It just needs a person who is more concerned with what is right than what they can get. And the judgment he gave, the ruling that ended a war between 2 brothers without leaving either one of them with nothing, that didn't come from law books. It came from understanding the human heart. Or in this case, the heart of something older and stranger than human. Real wisdom doesn't ask who wins. Real wisdom asks, how do we all walk away with something worth having? May God grant us that kind of wisdom. May He grant us the courage to walk into dark roads without running. And may He grant us the grace to use whatever power we are given for someone other than ourselves. Good night, friends.